Anything Ghost, number 320, for June of 2025. Welcome to Anything Ghost. I'm Lex Wall. Anything Ghost is a podcast that's been around since 2006, sharing ghost stories and local legends from listeners like you. If you have a story to share, send it to Lex at anythingghost.com. In 320, we have A Spooky House in Elgin, Illinois, The Ghost of the Tennessee River, a story from 1888, plus a story from Rod Matsui in LA. So stick around for 320. We'll get things started off with a story from Kaitlin in Illinois. Spooky House in Elgin, Illinois. From the time I was born until I was about 5 years old, I lived in a house in Elgin, Illinois. During that time, I had what my family believed was just an imaginary friend. But to me, he was very real. I could see him vividly, talk to him, and interact with him like any other person. My family thought it was cute and harmless. But deep down, I knew there was something more to it. The house had a weird energy. The basement especially felt dark and heavy. None of us liked going down there, and as little kids, we couldn't explain why. We just knew it felt off. But what really started to freak us out were the nightmares. Every single night, my two sisters and I had the exact same recurring dream. In it, we'd walk down into the basement and see a dark, shadowy figure with horns, wearing a black cloak. He'd just stand there in the corner, and the moment we saw him, we'd turn and run, screaming, and then we'd wake up terrified. We never told each other about it, but one night I mentioned the dream to my mom, and my sisters overheard. They froze. We realized that all three of us had been having the same nightmare over and over, down to the last detail. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just my imagination. Something was seriously wrong in that house. Eventually we moved when I was 5. The house was next to our grandparents' house, so we saw it all the time. The new family moved in, and we stayed in touch. Then, the new family's kids started having the same nightmare too. The same horned figure, that same basement. Their parents were freaked out enough to start digging into the house's history. They found out that years earlier a little boy had died in the house. I'm guessing it was the same boy that I had seen as my imaginary friend. After we moved out, I never saw him again. And the nightmares stopped. Cold turkey. Never came back. But things got even weirder. The new owners did some renovations and discovered a hidden room in the basement behind a wall. Inside was a large circle etched with a pentagram on the floor. It turned out that years ago, a cult had lived in the house. They used the basement for dark rituals and even sacrifices. Suddenly, everything made sense. The nightmares, the energy, the horned figure, all of it. And if that wasn't enough to make your skin crawl, there was something else about that neighborhood. Across the street, behind a row of houses, there was a cemetery. One Halloween, a man who lived over there threw a huge party. But at some point during the night, he went down into the basement and hung himself. Tragically, the guests thought it was a Halloween decoration until the party ended, and someone finally realized it was real. That whole block had a lingering darkness to it, like the land itself was cursed or marked by something beyond just one house. It wasn't just creepy, it was spiritually heavy. To this day, that house and everything that happened around it still haunts me. Okay, thank you for that story, Kaitlin, in Illinois. And I actually did a little search on Elgin, Illinois to see if I could find out about somebody who hung himself in a basement or sacrifices in a basement, but I didn't find anything as of yet. I'm going to do a little more digging. If I find something, I'll mention it in future podcasts. And up next is a story from Rod in Los Angeles.
This is Rod in Los Angeles again. You can hear all of my mini podcasts for free at Rod Matsui Productions over at patreon.com. So I have been listening to Anything Ghost for some years now, and you may remember a few different stories I've come in with, the tales of haunted Hollywood locations like the Hollywood Forever Haunted Cemetery, the strange experience on the island of Maui with the car that wouldn't start, haunted phone calls, and other things. And I enjoy many of the stories that I hear, like the tales from the unofficial Universal Orlando podcast, and the stories of Franklin B., the ghost enthusiast who has seen all 1,200 episodes of the Dark Shadows TV show. I have quite a few favorites. Now, Jenny Nicholson is on YouTube. She is a podcaster and a video producer who's a very astute commentator. She's famous for her reviews of the Disney Star Wars Hotel, the Galactic Star Cruiser experience. But Jenny Nicholson also did a scathing review of what she considered to be the worst ghost hunting show ever, and that's called Paranormal Home Inspectors. It involves a plumber, a psychic, and a couple of other people who come in to determine whether a home is haunted or if maybe there's just a problem with the plumbing. So everyone with a ghost problem who comes to this team for assistance gets their plumbing looked at for free. I had to go and look up this show to see if it was really as entertaining as Nicholson claims. And it is. So here's an old story. This is back in 1989. That's 35 years ago. Concerning these two researchers, I'll call them the two Barrys, Big Barry and Little Barry, let's call them. One is like a big teddy bear type guy, the other noticeably smaller and shorter, but people say both of them act decades younger than their actual ages because they love their work. One is more a videographer and filmmaker, and the other one's more a scientist and parapsychologist. But they work together sometimes because their talents complement each other. So one day in 1989, November or December, I get a call from Camera Barry, Big Barry, who says he and Little Barry, parapsychologist Barry, are going to look at a haunted location. And he said, "Hey, we're doing a ghost investigation in San Pedro. Do you want to come along? We're going to videotape it and see if something happens. The house is supposed to be really haunted." And he told me some details about the things happening at this haunted house out by the water. And I said, "Oh." And my first reaction was a warning instinct, a feeling, almost like a voice telling me, "Don't go down there, don't do it. It's a bad idea. There's something bad at that house, and if you go there, It could follow you home. It's not worth the $10 in gas money. Now, this was not a real paying gig. It was just a come-along invitation. And my feeling about this was very strong. If the house is as active as he says it is, then it's really active. Weird poltergeist stuff, noises, walls oozing liquid. It sounded very bad. Now, I appreciated the invite. I'm often interested in projects like this, but not this time. This was not a friendly, happy, ice cream bunny kind of haunted house. It sounded like the family was really having a bad time there, and why the heck would you want to go there? So I opted out on that. I said, look, the house sounds really bad, like really, really bad. So even though this might be fun, I have to say thank you. I believe I will sit this one out. And lo and behold, a week later, the Barrys come back to North Hollywood, and they've got footage to edit in the apartment studio there that Big Barry has, where he has this whole U-matic editing bay, and he starts going through the 3/4-inch taped footage. And there's flying lights and all kinds of optical anomalies that have recorded on his video. They even record some poltergeist activity outside the house with a garden gate that swings mysteriously open and closed. And this happens as a reddish light appears and flies past the gate. Extremely weird footage. Immediately, he has a bunch of useful video to edit with. And fairly soon, the poltergeist activity begins to manifest in his apartment while he's trying to edit the video into a show. Things start vanishing and reappearing in strange places. Strange fires are lit in the kitchen. It even was apparently influencing his editing equipment and causing it to malfunction. Little Barry was on hand to verify that these things were apparently happening. Big Barry began to wonder if maybe his cameras and videotapes had absorbed something at the San Pedro house. So I calls him as I sees him. He went out there and the ghost followed him home. It can be a dangerous business looking into these things, and I believe a person really needs to take care.
Okay, Rod, thank you for sharing that story. And I actually recall that story. It was a haunted house or some sort of poltergeist activity in San Pedro, California, which is near where I live now. And the woman that was involved, that was haunted by the ghost, was named Hernandez, Jackie Hernandez. And actually, without saying any more, there's a video on YouTube called An Unknown Encounter, Poltergeist Ghosts Documentary. So just look that up on YouTube. An Unknown Encounter, Poltergeist Ghosts Documentary. And that'll take you into the story that Rod was describing, that this, I guess one of these entities followed one of these film guys home. So check it out. The next story is from an old one. It's from episode number 96, and it was August of 2008, and my dog's playing in the background if you're hearing something. And it was from Ed in New Windsor, Maryland. Ghost in a newly built home. And this contains some EVP. So I hope you enjoy it. It's from August of 2008.
This is Ed from New Windsor, Maryland. About 5 years ago, I wanted to move out of the Glen Burnie, Maryland area and move out to the countryside. So my wife and I did the whole let's look at houses thing, and we settled upon Carroll County. Now, Carroll County, Maryland is mostly farmland, so there are lots of farmhouses and houses that are 50, 100, 150 years old. So when we were looking for houses, I specifically did not want to move into any house that was 100 years old because I was worried about there being paranormal activity in them. I mean, it's just the stereotype. You can move into an old house, you can bet there's going to be ghosts. So I stayed away from these kind of houses. So what we settled on was an empty piece of property, an acre, that was the last parcel remaining on an old farm. Now, there were houses built on all the other parcels. It was just this wild, unkept piece of property that was for sale. So we bought it, custom designed a house, and had it built. We moved in April 2005, tax day. And wouldn't you know it, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much painstaking effort I went through to get a house that wasn't haunted, it turns out that the house that I had built, a house brand new, is haunted anyway. So before I get into all the interesting things going on in my house, I wanted to give a little history of the town of New Windsor, Maryland. This town is old, and if I would have known how old this town was, I don't know if I would have moved here. The town was originally founded in 1797, and in the 1820s, a military road connecting Washington, D.C. to Buffalo, New York was constructed through town. During the Civil War, Confederate troops came through town and ransacked the town, including a grocery store the building is still standing. It's the corner of Main and Church Street. It was called Roop's Grocery Store, and they came through and they pillaged the town and kept moving on. The store is still standing. It's a restaurant now, but all the original buildings are still standing. So there's a lot of history in this town. Okay, so we had this house built about a half mile south of town on a hill known as Hawks Hill. And we moved in, and things didn't start to happen right away. Not at all. In fact, it was about 2 years before anything happened at all. I think what started it off, and the red flag that started everything, was one morning, my wife and I were sleeping in, and my two youngest daughters had woken up it was a Saturday morning, and my wife and I had slept in. When we got up, my daughters, which were approximately 6 and 7 at the time, told us that they were playing right outside our door, and this figure walked through our closed door, my wife and I closed door from our bedroom, walked past them and into what was then our office, which he basically walked right by them. And they said he was tall, he was wearing a hat, and he was completely black. And they remembered looking up at him as they walked by. Now, I wasn't sure what to say to this. I was like, okay, are you sure you guys didn't imagine it? But in the back of my mind, I knew, well, they both saw it. They both were adamant about the fact, yeah, we saw it. So my wife and I said, oh, that's really weird. And I don't want to say that we didn't think anything else of it, but in that situation, what do? You know, you don't sit there and say, oh my God, we're leaving out of this house. You just like, okay, well, we'll just, keep an eye on things and listen out for anything else out of the ordinary that's going to happen like this. Well, nothing else noticeable or extraordinary happened after that for several years. Looking back, a catalyst happened. Something happened in our family that was really traumatic, and when that happened, that's when all the paranormal activity started. And I'm sure that was the key. For some reason, the paranormal activity keyed in on this, and it really started up. What happened that made me take notice was we had gone to bed. Everyone had gone to bed. It was a weeknight. And my girls are older. They're in separate rooms. And I had put my middle daughter to bed. And she had a bunk bed that was left over when they used to share a room. And she was sleeping on the top bunk. Put them to bed, and my wife and I had gone into our room, retired to our room to read a little bit before we fell asleep. And my middle daughter came in, scared out of her mind, and said that her door, there was a knock on her door, and she heard on the padded carpet footsteps approaching her bunk bed, and then she felt something get into the lower bunk. Weight or a person getting into it making the entire bunk bed, shake as if you were laying in the top bunk and someone got in the bottom bunk. The bunk would shake and creak. And she had thought it was her younger sister. And she looked down to the bottom bunk, and there was nobody there. So she immediately crawled out of bed, opened the door, went into my room, and said, "This is just what happened." And my wife and I, we were just aghast. We didn't know what to do. So the next night, we put her back to bed. That same night, we put her back to bed and let her sleep with her younger sister. And to this day, my middle daughter does not like to sleep alone. And we're going on 2 years since this incident. And she adamantly refuses to sleep alone. So the next night after the incident happened, I decided, I went out to dinner with my wife, and I decided if there's things going on in my house, I want to be able to capture them. And as a career, I'm a computer programmer. So there's a lot of time that I'm working on code, I'm programming something, so I can listen to things. Sometimes I listen to music, sometimes I listen to podcasts. So I'm thinking, why don't I just set a recorder on, record things going on at night, and start capturing things. If things are actually indeed going on in my house, I can record them at night, and I could listen to the whole recording during the day while I work. I thought about doing a video, and recording different parts of the house on video, but I knew that wouldn't work because I would not be able to work my job and watch a video at the same time. So I think recording sound was the best way to go. So at dinner, I decided I'm going to go to the nearest Office Depot or Staples and pick up a cheap sound recorder, a voice recorder. So this is what started about a year's worth of recordings that I picked up a whole bunch of stuff. But what was very interesting is the first night that I recorded anything, I picked up probably the most interesting EVP I've ever picked up since I've been recording. Now, I'm going to play it for you here. I'm just going to insert the actual MP3 in here. But I want to make a little note that this sound was picked up about 10 minutes after I turned on the recording. And I know I was still awake. So let's go ahead and listen to this right now. So after the first night of recording, I plugged in my headphones and I started listening to what I possibly could have captured this first night. And about 5-10 minutes into the recording, I hear that. So, like any normal human being, I said, "What the heck was that?" That voice that you heard was not my daughter's. They were down, out, asleep. And that was not their voice. Also, it was in some language that I do not know. And if anybody out there recognizes that language, I sure would love to know what she said. Towards the end of that recording, you hear some bells. I just want to let you know that those are wind chimes that are actually located on my front porch. It was a windy night that night. So those bells are not paranormal. There's nothing out of the ordinary. What you want to focus on is that voice in the first 30 seconds or so of the recording. So as a point of reference, the event that occurred, the thing that crawled into my daughter's bed, happened on April 18th, 2008. The next night, my wife and I went out to dinner, and I decided that night, April 19th, to purchase the voice recorder. And that was the first night I started recording, and April 19th, 2008 was the night that I caught that voice. This was just the beginning of a lot of EVPs and noises that I caught and captured on my night recordings, that I call them, and just the beginning of the different experiences that my family has experienced over the past year. And I would love to share it with y'all, but I think that's enough for today, and I'll turn it back over to Lex. I've taken enough of his time, and until then, this is Ed from New Windsor. Take care.
And I'm actually going to share another story from that same podcast. It was number 96. And it was actually August of 2009, not 2008, as I said before. And this one is from Karen in Colorado. And I'm not sure what I called it in that year, but I'm titling it Sleep Paralysis with a Paranormal Twist. For quite some time growing up, I was a severe insomniac. It began in high school and continued on into college. Those years were so hard because I would lie awake in bed, restless for hours on end, alone and nervous, and not really sure why. I always felt uneasy at night, especially in the dark. The dark frightened me. It still does. I would always go to bed with my door tightly shut and the light on. Many times, I would only be able to sleep if the television was on or if a CD was playing. Once I was asleep, I suffered from frequent nightmares, full of horrifying monsters and images so unsettling that I would wake many times in the middle of the night, sobbing and shaking uncontrollably. Other times, I woke up completely paralyzed for several minutes. By the time I was 18, I was used to bad dreams and sleepless nights. But about a year ago, my dreams began to morph into something very different, something I would almost describe as malicious and evil. I remember the bizarre occurrences first began in the winter, right after I turned 19. That winter was a cold one, and at the time I was living with my parents. My bedroom was located in the furthest upstairs corner of the house. It was hard to regulate the temperature in that room because of its location. So it was often too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. This winter was no exception. No matter what I tried, I couldn't raise the temperature in my room. I would go to bed shivering underneath my blankets, frigid from head to toe. This discomfort made it even harder for me to drift off to sleep at night. My insomnia continued. One night I had an unusual dream that, to this day, is so vivid to me. I dreamt that I had waken up and a large creature was crouching next to my bed, breathing heavily. It looked almost human-like, and although I couldn't see its face, hair covered its entire body, and it had a long tail that stretched across the floor. I was so terrified I couldn't even scream. It turned and saw me looking at it, and ran out my bedroom door so quickly that its tail flew up and knocked over some lotion bottles and jewelry that I had sitting on my desk, located on the opposite wall of my bed. I blacked out as its footsteps continued to thud down the hallway. The next morning, I woke up to a truly unbelievable sight. My lotion bottles and jewelry were laying all over the floor, just where they had been in my nightmare. At first, this was nothing but puzzling to me, because although I had suffered from bad dreams for years, I had never experienced a dream like that before. A dream whose edges blended with that of reality. I blew it off, thinking that perhaps my cats had come in, jumped on my desk, and knocked them down. This was highly unlikely, as my cat never slept in my room or entered it at night. But it was an answer that soothed the sick feeling in my stomach that I got every time I thought about the possibility of something evil coming out of my dream world and into my real one. Several nights later, I had another nightmare that was equally unnerving. In my dream, I again woke up in the middle of the night and found a massive dark creature standing over my bed, looking down at me. The creature looked incredibly similar to that of one that I had seen in my room several nights earlier. I tried to sit up in my bed and scream, but it was too late. The creature grabbed me by the throat with a strong hand and forced me back into my pillow, choking me. Its other hand held down my left arm. I flailed in my bedsheets, trying my hardest to scream, to wake myself up from this horrific nightmare, but I was trapped underneath this monster's hold. I believed in that moment it intended on killing me. I finally reached up with my free hand and pulled as hard as I could on the creature's hair. It was dry, thick, and thistly. The monster's eyes began to glow a bright yellow color, and it let out an enormous scream, a scream so inhuman-sounding and high-pitched that my heart beat so fast I passed out. The next morning I woke up with a headache pounding at my temples. I was still a bit shaken by the previous night and feeling troubled about being unable to get a good night's rest in my freezing cold room. I went into the bathroom to grab some aspirin, and I noticed something dark on my left forearm where the creature had been grasping me so tightly. It was a large purple bruise, exactly in the shape of a big thumbprint. I looked closer and found scratches up and down my neck and chest. I knew that something was very wrong in the house, and that there was a force in my room that deliberately meant to harm me. Whatever it wasn't human. I decided it wasn't a good idea to sleep there anymore, so I crashed on the couch for a few nights. I slept very little there, too. About a week later, I told a close friend of mine about my sleeping problems. He suggested that I keep a journal next to my bed to track what I ate before bed, and any dreams I have, if I exercised before bed, how many hours of sleep I got, and variables that could perhaps explain my insomniac lifestyle. I agreed, and began to sleep back in my room again, as well as write down every activity I partook in before getting under my covers each night. It was a purple notebook that I kept safely hidden under my bed. No one else knew about it but me. After about a week and a half of starting my journaling, I woke up one morning to find pieces of paper out in the middle of the room on the floor. I dug out my journal from under the bed and was mortified to find that pages were half torn out and some pages were missing altogether. I hadn't disclosed to anyone the location of the journal, not even to my close friend that had recommended it to me in the first place. I questioned everyone living in the house at that time and asked them if they had played some sort of sick prank on me. No one had touched my notebook. I was a nervous wreck by this point, so exhausted from no sleep and bad dreams that I could barely function day to day. I didn't understand what was going on around me. I never knew if I was asleep or awake. Nothing seemed like reality anymore. I felt isolated, crazy, scared, and helpless to fight off whatever was viciously pursuing me. And still, the insomnia continued. The last dream incident was the one that put me over the edge. Once again, I was sleeping in my bedroom and dreamt that I had awoken to find the figure entering my room. I bolted up in fear and felt something hard hit my face repeatedly. I fell back on my pillow, trying hard to scream, but nothing came out of my vocal cords. Whoever this being was, it was striking my face again and again, making low, grunting sounds. I felt suffocated and in tremendous pain, but I don't remember anything after that. I woke up the next day to a pillowcase stained with reddish black blood. That was the end of the rope for me. I didn't sleep in that room for the rest of the winter. I slept mostly at friends' houses or at my boyfriend's house. It was still hard for me to go to sleep, but at least when I drifted off, I didn't have to fear any bad dreams waking me up later or having to face that awful aftermath of an altered, shaken actuality. For some reason, once the winter months were past and the spring and summer came, the horrible nightmares ceased. I have not had any dreams like those dreams since. I have a sneaking suspicion that the cold temperature in my room exacerbated my sleeping problems, as if it were a vehicle, or, for lack of better word, portal for the wicked, violent things that occurred there. I will probably never know for sure what happened during those months. All I know is that I believe that whatever spirit, creature, or demon resided in my bedroom was somehow able to find me and get to me through the frigid air of my room and somehow seep slightly but significantly into another dimension, into reality. Needless to say, I only sleep in warm rooms today. It is those rooms that I feel, at last, rested. And those were two stories from Anything Ghost in August of 2009, episode 96. And I have the complete archive available, but there's a one-time membership fee. You can find out more by going to anythingghost.com and click on or tap Join VIP. Anythingghost.com and tap on Join VIP. And we have one more story for you. And as I said in the intro, this was from 1888, January 22nd of 1888, The Ghost of the Little Tennessee River in Knoxville, Tennessee. And before I begin the story, I'd like to clear something up for some of you who don't know, like me. The story mentions something called a ford. Not a fjord, like in Norway, but a ford. And a ford is a shallow place in a river or stream that allows one to walk or drive across. So now that we know that, let's move on with the show. On the night of December 13th, 1879, John McWade was murdered near Howard's Ford in the Little Tennessee River in eastern Tennessee. For miles along the river, the country is wild and sparsely populated. Even on the brightest day of the year, it is lonely enough. But on the night in question, it was doubly dreary. The day was dark and cloudy, and toward evening it began to rain, and by the time night came, the rain poured down in torrents. A few hundred yards from the ford lived an old man and his wife, whom the neighbors called Uncle and Auntie Howard, after whom the ford was named. At about 8 p.m. that night, Mr. Howard said he was startled by a piercing scream, as if someone was in great distress and was crying for him. He went to the door and listened, but could hear nothing save the incessant pouring of the rain and sobbing of the winds. "I reckon it was only fancy," he said to his wife, and he went back to his pipe and sat by the corner of the fireplace. "But it did sound uncommon like a human." The next morning, when John McWade was found at the ford, with his head nearly severed from his body, the cry for help from the night before was explained. Little or nothing was known of the murdered man. 2 years before this, he had purchased a small farm in the mountains. But where he came from, and what his history had been, he didn't choose to disclose with his neighbors. Some of the neighbors said that he had a history behind him, while others, mostly mothers of the neighborhood, declared he had been crossed in love and came to the mountains to forget his sorrow. Who had ever seen him do a day's work? And yet, who had ever known him to want for money? At first, the simple country folk looked upon the young McWade with distrust. However, the numberless little acts of kindness he did for them completely won them over. All misgivings were dismissed. But when he was found murdered at the ford, their suspicions asserted themselves again, and all were more anxious than ever to penetrate the mystery. The nearest they could come to a clue was this. On the night of the murder, and a little while afterward, it was committed that the stranger stopped by the house of Milton Barnes, who lives about 5 miles from the ford, and who was McWade's nearest neighbor, who lived 2 miles further up the river in the direction the stranger had come. He had asked for supper and feed for his horse. Barnes afterward remembered that the stranger asked a number of questions concerning McWade, but he thought nothing of it at the time. He furthermore declared that the stranger could not have reached the ford before the murder was committed, on account of the darkness of the night, the rain, and fearful condition of the road. But judging from the time that he left the house and the time the murder was committed, he must have reached it about 8 p.m. All these facts led to the belief that the stranger, whoever he was, must have been the murderer of John McWade. And it was obvious that he was not murdered for his money, because nearly $100 and his handsome gold watch were found on McWade's person the morning after the murder. McWade's house was carefully searched by officers in the hope that something may be found that would lead to discoveries, but not so. And in time, the affair was almost, if not quite, forgotten. But something was shortly to happen that would refresh the memory of the people of that neighborhood and invest the murdered man with a new interest. Now comes the startling point of this story. Just 1 year, to the very hour and day from the night of the murder, old Daniel Howard said he again heard the same cry for help, rather faint at first, but growing stronger rapidly, as if coming nearer to the house. All of a sudden, it ceased, but the next instant, the latch on the door began to rattle, followed by a sharp rapping on the window. And looking up, Howard saw the murdered McWade peering in at the window. Only the head and shoulders were visible, but the plainest part of all was the bloody gash across the throat. Old Howard recited his experience to the neighbors, and while a few believed the story, most of them thought it was only a fantasy. The months went by, and Howard's ghost story was forgotten. The 13th of December came again, and that night at 8 p.m., Howard once again heard the cry and saw the murdered McBride. This time his statement was corroborated by Cable Gordon, one of the men who had laughed at the story the year before. It so happened that Gordon crossed the ford that night about 8 p.m. He had crossed it hundreds of times before, at all hours of the night, and had never had any trouble with his team. But this night they were tired, and he had a hard time getting them down to the ford. All of a sudden, a figure clad in white rose up at the side of the road, and this frightened the horses so much that they broke into a dead run. Scarcely had they reached the other side of the river when, Gordon says, there broke upon his ears the most appalling scream he had ever heard. a mingling, it seemed to him, of fear, pain, and anger. Then he remembered Howard's story, and he knew that he too had seen the ghost of the murdered McBride. A few months after this, old Mr. Howard died, and his wife went to live with a married son. Their place passed into the hands of a man named Dawson from Virginia, an entire stranger in that section. He moved in the spring of 1883. The year went by, and the 13th of December came around once again. The night was the same as the night in 1879. The rain came down in a perfect deluge, and winds moaned the gullies of the mountains. Precisely at 8 p.m., Dawson stated that he and his family, consisting of his wife and 3 children, the eldest of whom was a young man of 22 years, were sitting around the fire when they were startled by what seemed like a cry for help. Faint at first, but growing stronger each instant, as if approaching the house. He and his son both sprang to their feet, grabbed their guns, and started for the door. Suddenly, he said, the scream ceased. Then followed the peculiar rattling of the door latch and tapping on the window, as was described by Howard. They all looked toward the window, and they saw the head and shoulders of a man. His hair was disheveled, a ghastly pallor overspread his face, and across his throat ran a frightfully bloody gash. The specter vanished as quickly as it came. But there was very little sleep in the household that night. In the morning, Dawson went to a neighbor's home and related the occurrence of the night before. When asked how the apparition looked, strange to say, he described the appearance exactly as the murdered McWade. Dawson was then told the story of the murder and of former visits of his ghost. Dawson declared that it was the first time he had heard of it, and he believed the stories. True or not, Dawson declared that he could no longer live in the home, and before night fell that day, he secured another home for his family about a mile down the river. The house finally got such a reputation that nobody would live in it. The windows were all broken, the neighbors declared, by the rapping of the ghost, and the doors sagged on their hinges. Altogether, it was the dreariest place one could find in a year's travel. The very dogs and cattle of the fields gave it wide berth, and strangers have it pointed out to them as the haunted house. This year, a party of young men from an eastern city was hunting in that neighborhood, and having heard the story, concluded to investigate the matter for themselves. According on the night of December 13th, the party, 5 in number, repaired to the spot. A little before 8 p.m., 2 of the number lost courage and left, but the other 3 were determined to remain. One of them struck a match and consulted his watch. It was 3 minutes until 8 p.m. Would they see the ghost? The question had hardly been asked when something white, apparently the figure of a man, rose from the earth and glided toward the ford. When within a few feet of the water's edge, it stopped. Then it began what seemed to be a desperate struggle. This lasted only a few seconds, and was followed by the most frightful scream any mortal had ever heard. The figure writhed as if suffering the most intense pain. A shiver ran through it, and it sank into a heap on the ground. But suddenly, it recovered itself, and in the next instant was flying across the fields in the direction of the haunted home. The young men, who had been paralyzed, as they said, by the appalling sight, now came to themselves and beat a hasty retreat, vowing that from then on they would take people's word for it. Thus, on the night of December 13th, and on no other night, strange to say, the spirit of the murdered McWade comes back to Earth and will probably continue to do so until the foul crime is avenged, or it confronts the murderer before the bar of justice. And that's it for Anything Ghost number 320. I hope you enjoyed your stay here. And again, if you want the complete archives, check out the Anything Ghost VIP group at www.anythingghost.com. Join VIP. Thanks for all your stories, everybody, this time around. And I'll talk to you in show number 321, coming your way soon. Until then, have a wonderful week and take care.